Next up, we have Sam McLane, the Chief Technical Services Officer from Arctic Wolf. Sam, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Sam McLane, Chief Technology Services Officer for Arctic Wolf Networks, and today I'd like to talk to you about security effectiveness. When I talk about security effectiveness, I'm talking about the problems we currently have in our industry where if you think about the number of vendors and the amount of money that's spent in trying to protect companies from cyber attacks, it doesn't seem as though we're making a lot of progress. The breaches continue to keep coming, and it doesn't seem like no matter how much money or how many different new and better tools we throw at the problem, the issue stays with us. This stems from a variety of reasons. The first of which is that there just aren't enough security professionals to go around. This problem has plagued us for the past decade. There are currently, by some estimates, 3.5 to 4 million unfulfilled jobs in the cybersecurity industry, and that just is going to continue to grow. More importantly, those of us that do work in this industry suffer from all kinds of stress-related issues. Just because you feel underwater, there's really nothing there. And that stems from having a plethora of products out there that are always getting better, always finding more things to do. Most customers these days have between 5 and 10 security products that they rely on, and that just generates thousands of alerts. And if you think about the kinds of events we're talking about, you go from millions of critical events or millions of observations to thousands of interesting events that then need to be looked at, and only half of them they get looked at. And of those, only about a quarter are real, and of those we don't even fix half of them. And so the problem continues to persist because it's just difficult to understand and prioritize. If you think about how we got here, we started with this idea of if you're going to connect to the internet, you need to have good basics, a firewall, a good AV tool. But as those threats morphed and it was no longer just a worm on a floppy disk or a USB drive, as it came in over web and over encryption, next generation tools, next gen firewalls, proxies started to come about to help address those issues. Once you've got all of these all these tools, you need to integrate them somehow. And so we move towards the world of security platforms. We still now have a fully integrated, fully aware suite of tools that are connected up, but I go back to the number of events problem, and you wind up with this idea that you have an operations issue that you now need to deal with. And if you look at the problem, the breaches continue no matter what we seem to do. As I said at the beginning, the tools are clearly getting better. We're clearly able to identify new attack threats, new vectors, the techniques that are going on. The world is way more aware of security, both at the board level as well as at the vendor level. So, Microsoft and Apple and Android and Google, all of the companies out there are constantly reviewing their source code, reviewing their products for bugs. So the awareness is at a heightened level, but we're still seeing breaches. And if you look at some of the breaches that have occurred over the past decade, these are really big companies. We're talking about Target, where they had a SOC telling them that people were breaking into their environment, that they had attackers in, and it was ignored by the corporate SOC. Equifax knew they had vulnerabilities, but they had so many vulnerabilities across their public web services that they couldn't prioritize and get the right things patched at the right time. And Capital One, as they move their data to the cloud, as their vendors move data to the cloud, failed to configure a storage bucket properly and wound up exposing 100 million events. These are really big companies, but even the companies, it's not big companies that we're dealing with. At Arctic Wolf, we deal with small, medium enterprise customers between 400 or 500 users and 3,000 users typically. And 18% of our customers, we were able to detect a phishing that was successful, that made it past their mail filter, that made it through their systems. And 43% of our customers, we identified an advanced threat that had made it through their EDR and their firewall and their spam filters. And a vast majority of our customers, we have found multiple usernames out on the dark web that have been compromised in some way. And so the idea is, what can you do to help? And I've got a couple of sort of stories that highlight sort of the operational failures, the security failures at our customers, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we can do to solve them. So the first war story I want to talk about involves sort of good IT hygiene. We had a company that came on board. We were monitoring their environment, and we noticed a bunch of failed login attempts on this one account. And when we dug in further, we noticed that this account was a privileged account, and eventually they were able to successfully log in. That triggered an event with us. We talked to the customer, and it turns out that the account that we were monitoring was actually an ex-employee on the IT staff. Now, this is an employee that had privilege, and their account was never disabled or deleted. And again, this is not something where it's a weak password or a bug or a flaw, an exploit. This was just a failure of we didn't follow our offboarding process properly. So there, it's definitely sort of the operations problem there that you're highlighting. And next problem we saw was, we brought a customer on board, and one afternoon we noticed that the CEO had sent out all these emails in a spike to their customers after someone had logged in from a foreign country that was unexpected. One of the employees clicked on the link and got infected. And while we were talking to our contact at the customer, those emails had gone out and someone had gotten infected. They were able to sort of clean this up. It took days to clear off everyone's desktop. But when we brought this to their attention, the entire organization floundered because they didn't know who to contact. They didn't have call sheets for the executives, HR, legal. No one understood the ramifications and what was going to happen. And that led to a bit of chaos as we helped them clean up. Now, they did clean it up. Everything happened. But still, it just goes to show you that again, an operational issue, an operational failure can exacerbate a really bad problem. Again, sort of the next sort of idea here around sort of strategic operational considerations and strategy around security architecture. We had one of our customers where we had just set up cloud logging on Office 365, and as part of our process, we asked what countries are you supposed to be able to log in from so that we can put everyone else on the watch list. And as soon as we found a customer or an attacker, they tried to log in, and they eventually did successfully log in as we were getting this done. But the alert that drove us to find this interesting was they then added a rule to forward all email to a Google account that clearly wasn't associated with this customer. As we went through and reviewed all of the accounts in that customer, there were several more that this attacker had done, and they were just stealing information by collecting everything that was in these people's email accounts. So that led them to then reevaluate their we don't need multi-factor authentication review. Again, a failure at the operation strategic level, not necessarily a tooling problem or an exploit that had gone wrong. These are all, everything I'm talking about here, it's not a failure of a product or a tool. This is an operational failure. And the thing to think about here is that, when you start to look at the current landscape and how we're dealing as an industry, both the vendor side and the customer side, how are we dealing with these things? The tooling has gotten so good that it really is not necessarily always about how much money you spend or what tools you have. If you remember from back in the 2000s when all the AV vendors were leapfrogging each other, we catch more, no, we catch more, you could measure the differences between the top tier and some of the free open source stuff. It was 99% and 50%. And so people really didn't consider the open source and free technologies as something that was really valuable. Nowadays, when you look at that same kind of a report, our endpoint collects these kinds of things or catches these kinds of threats out of the MITRE attack framework. You can measure the difference between the top of the line and the open source free tools. It's a matter of tenths of a percent, 99.2 to 99.1 or 99. So it's not really about the tools themselves. It's more about operationalizing the tools. How do you deal with it? How do you have them configured? And if you take into account, some of the current trends that we're seeing, whether it's the push to move everybody remote because of COVID-19, which introduced several different sort of areas of concern in the security industry. The first is everybody became remote. There wasn't a lot of user traffic coming out of your perimeter anymore, which is traditionally where everyone's invested all of their security dollars. That next generation firewall that you spent all the money on really doesn't help you if everyone's on the outside of it behind the defaultly configured Comcast cable modem and router that's out there. The second thing is that now you've got humans that think of themselves as working from home, but that's actually their corporate environment, and the change in mentality, the mixing of corporate assets and personal assets, letting your children do their homework on your laptop while you're not using it, having their gaming PC that's probably riddled with malware on the same broadcast network as your laptop. The change in attitude of I'm working from home as opposed to I'm working. Sort of that whole sort of lowering of the security spidey sense, if you will, really is there. And then lastly, just the sheer I need to research more. I'm getting emails from my vendors, from my peers about COVID-19. The fear that came with this sort of shift in the macro condition of the world has led to new opportunities for phishing and account takeover stuff. Along with this threat came sort of a more rapid move to cloud. Most of the customers that we talk to, most everyone in the industry has some cloud strategy. Some people were just starting to get there. Other people were deeper into it. But the idea that people were moving to cloud and now suddenly everything's remote, they've got to have access so that business can continue. Everybody moved to cloud much faster than was expected. And if you think that the skill shortage in security is tight, then you need to start looking at, well, what of those people that are very rare and precious, how many of them actually know the proper way to configure Azure and AWS and Google and Office 365? I mean, there's just such a lack of understanding in a lot of places about those technologies. And as well as, do you understand where all your cloud data is? As people sign up, as sales signs up for a marketing system, or your engineering team signs up for a ticketing system, or some kind of code review, or they start saving things out in GitHub or Bitbucket, are you aware of the sprawl and breadth of corporate data and where it actually sits? These are all interesting questions. And if you sort of look back at everything I've sort of talked about in the past 15 minutes, there's a people shortage. We don't have enough people. There are way too many alerts for the few people we do have to deal with successfully. That stems from a maturation of the products that we use and the types of products, the types of alerts. AI saying, hey, these are all anomalous actions. And the breaches just keep escalating. They get worse, and the move to cloud just muddies the whole thing, because not only do you have true breaches that are out of brute force attacks and sort of the traditional methods, but people don't know how to configure them correctly. So there's a true sort of culmination of all kinds of things of how can you possibly make sense of all this. And when you talk about the path forward, we like to talk about an operational approach. I like to talk to people about the fact that we have come to a spot where security is now a boardroom level topic. And it's not just, hey, you can go into a board and say, hey, we just bought new Palo Alto firewalls, and they're the greatest thing. They've got all the bells and whistles. We spent, $250,000, and the CFO or the head of HR, the head of sales are going to look at you and go, I have no idea what you're talking about, because understanding that the tools are better really doesn't help them. What they want to know is, what are the programs you have in place? Are your people properly trained? Do you understand how to look for breaches, defend against breaches, and if a breach happens, what are you doing? And so in order to take all of the issues I described and put them into a business context that will make sense for the rest of your peers on the board, you need to look at an operational approach that sort of is cyclical in nature. And you can define and defend. We have a program that starts with visibility. We have the right coverage, and I'll walk through these in more detail in a minute, but leads to, and we can measure it, and we are continuously improving it. And so once you have that cycle, you can start to talk to people about the true business impact of security. And so now let's go through some of this and see how one would start to think about implementing an operational approach to their security efforts. Start with broad visibility. As I said, there are thousands of tools out there. And really, the only thing worse than saying I was breached and was I was breached and I had no clue that there was an attack going on. So a lack of visibility is almost the weakest defense you could possibly put forth. Saying, yes, we had 50,000 alerts and we missed one, that's an expected thing. Even as a vendor here, no one claims to be perfect. But the idea is, if you have the right tools and the right programs in place, if you miss one part of the Lockheed Martin kill chain, you will catch the next one. And so that's part of this whole system is that you really want to be able to defend all the different aspects of what's going on. Do you have the right data? Are you able to capture it all, store it all, process it all? And when I'm talking about the right data, this sort of highlights a more detailed view. What are the kinds of things I'm looking for? Well, the first thing is, do I have access to all of the network level data? Do I know what's traversing my network? What's coming in and out of the firewall? What's going east-west between the clients and the servers? And do I have the right controls in place? Am I able to see what's there? Secondly, do I have access to all the server data and identity data, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud? Do I have all the rest of the cloud sources where all of my data resides, so that if I were audited and I say I understand the governance of my data, I could say it's in all these places, I have access logs, I have controls, and I'm monitoring it. And then do you centrally store it someplace where, in the event of a crisis, your incident response plan can say, go here, everything will be there. So that idea of broad visibility, being able to see everything that's out there and collect it into one spot and having confidence that that's working, is really sort of the foundational piece as we start the operational approach to security. The second thing is being able to actually then make sense of the data you're collecting. A lot of people will start off with the idea, I can do this myself. And what we found, and what others in our industry find, is that in order to build a SOC on your own that can actually do this 7x24, 365, you need somewhere between 10 and 12 people. You need to have the right tools, so you need to have SIM, you need to have threat intel, you need to have all the right agents to collect all the right data, you've got to have the API integrations. It's more than likely going to have some level of integration with a ticketing system so that you can understand what's going on. And then you need all the operational support for that, whether it's the server, the database managers, the developers to help with the integration work. All of that requires an enormous amount of effort. And most companies that are, not Fortune 500 will wind up outsourcing some portion of that. And then there are pitfalls there as well. Being an outsourced provider, we try very hard to alleviate these concerns, but is your provider able to have the right context? Do they understand your environment, your business? What users are important? What data is important? Where is it stored? And then do they have a consistency of the quality of their staff? Does your provider have proper training programs in place? Do they have a competency matrix so that they can guarantee that the person that's working the midnight to 6 a.m. shift has got the same skills as the person that's on from 6 a.m. to noon? Those are the kinds of questions that you should be asking. What we find that most people do is they wind up in a hybrid model where aspects of the security program are managed internally, because ultimately you can never give up your security ownership. At the board level, I'm not going to be standing there saying, yes, Arctic Wolf is to blame here and explaining a breach. I might attend and help support, but eventually someone's going to own it. But then they also may not have the money to staff a 7x24 SOC, as I discussed a moment ago. So a hybrid approach is almost what everybody sort of works on, but then you have to integrate your systems with our systems, and so there's a lot of effort there. Once you've figured out coverage, then it's a question of, okay, do I actually have the right people in the right spots? As I said, the human shortage really drives this as a problem. And one of the things that we found is that if you're able to acquire security talent, they tend to get overloaded by the noise, and so they've got to do some work. It's difficult to find a generalist who you would consider to be an expert everywhere. So you might find an Active Directory security expert, but they don't touch firewalls, or a networking person that doesn't understand the cloud, or a cloud person, but don't talk to me about endpoints. So finding the right mix of expertise in this area can be really tough. And then at the end of the day, most IT people I talk to wear 4 or 5 hats. Security people are no different. And so you wind up working 10 to 12 hours. I've been on several webinars over the past 3 or 4 months talking to people in the industry, end users, other providers, other security areas. And the work from home dynamic of COVID-19 has driven everyone to be very, you work 12 hours a day and you don't even realize it. You wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, you sit in your chair, you hop on Zoom, and suddenly you're like, holy crap, it's dinner time. Those kinds of, that dynamic is really sort of pervasive, especially in the security industry. What I like to tell people is, if you do one thing over the next couple of weeks, it's put a program in place to take your most talented people and force them to take a day off. Force them to spend every Friday morning or every Tuesday morning doing some kind of personal development, take an online course, get them to start to understand cloud security, and tell them, you know what, take a 2-hour class in the morning and then take the rest of that day off. Give them back a portion of their personal time to just manage their work-life balance. Most people say they'll do it, and then when you go in and look at timesheets, you go and look at vacation requests, and they're just not taking the time off. So do that work to keep your smart people happy. The other area, the sort of next area here is that it's great to have good, smart, tactical people, but oftentimes as sort of a security leader, whether you're a director of security, a CISO, having a strategic peer that you can talk to and say, we're thinking about, I've got a budget next year. I'm not quite sure where to place those dollars. What concerns you? Being able to get the right kind of alignment with your internal business. And whether that's you or an outsourced vCISO or something, you need to have access to people that have a knowledge of what's going on in the landscape, what the current threat makeup looks like, and what people are doing, what are the trends that are happening. And oftentimes peer groups, webinars such as this one, are really interesting. Find people that you trust that you can talk about. Not at a detailed, hey, we were breached last week kind of a level, but more, hey, what are you guys doing for endpoint? What are you doing for, what are you guys doing for cloud security? The last piece is metrics. Again, if you've ever sat through a board presentation and you get to security and they're like, yeah, we weren't breached, it's really difficult to understand the value, the impact. Is our spend commensurate with the level of protection we're getting? So things that you want to look for: mean time to detect, mean time to respond. Measure your security posture against a framework. NIST is an industry standard. It sort of strategically covers the broad base of everything you would need. But if you need more detailed help, if you want to figure out, well, where do I actually want to apply my efforts within NIST, look at something like the CIS controls. They are way better defined, more granular, and you can know what initiatives would make sense. And then lastly, make sure you go and get industry comparison data so that you can say, we're doing X and the industry standard is Y, we're 5% better, we're 10% better. Following all of these things gives you the ability to say our tools problem isn't going to bring us down because we have operational excellence. And that's really what this is all about. Okay, I'm going to open it up for questions. Thank you for your time. If you have questions, please let us know.